You may have doubles. Just deal with it for now. All right.
I'm your English teacher.
So,
Literacy strategy for that.
to conserve time and to answer the needs of Ms. Bancroft and Ms. Baylor, we will move forward.
Okay, here.
I hope you enjoyed lunch today. Awesome. Great. Yes, I am, sir.
Oh, should we be
Right.
listening?
What about all those people in the other room?
What about-
Why do they have a separate?
They're separate meeting. They're doing
They're doing redos and retakes. Our whole content today is just like we kind of talked about at the end, and that is replacing the formative with the summative assessment. So, in the interest of everybody's time, what I thought I would do is just expedite everything by just giving you a quick reading on the argument for replacing the formative with the summative assessment and the strategy, the process of how to do that. And so in front of you, that's where you have replacing the formative with summative. The argument, practice in school includes homework and classwork and quizzes. This is where teachers instruct and students use that instruction to solve problems, draw conclusions, or make connections. Teachers use practice to gauge progress and prepare for the future. Next are the scrimmages, or the quizzes, that enable the teacher to check the pulse of the class. Quizzes shouldn't define a student's success or failure, but instead should be a barometer for both the teacher and the student about the progress that's being made. After scrimmaging and discussing through feedback the successes and failures of the scrimmage, it's time for a game or a test. And under this model, the idea is where the true percentage, the true value, is on these summative assessments. What is the student walking away with after the final process of your lessons? Okay? So this is classwork, this is warm-up, this is homework, this is quizzes. What is the end result that we're looking for? What did they learn in that being the test? Well, peruse that, if you will. Included, like I said, is a strategy for going through and replacing these quiz grades with the test grades. You heard Stephanie earlier today saying that she goes back and she replaces the homework and the warm-up as part of her formative grades as well. We're certainly not asking you to do that right away. What Wendy and what Katie have done, I think, is a little bit easier to grasp, and that is replacing the quiz grades with the test grade. I have 3 scenarios for you. Some of you might find them to look familiar, but it's scenario A, B, and C. And if you could read through those for me right quick, A, B, and C, and then circle whether or not you agree or disagree with that practice. So for instance,
Other page.
right here.
Got it. Oh, there it is.
Thoughts on grading practices. If we base our grades on standards rather than attendance, behavior, or extra credit, which has nothing to do with the course objectives, we can actually help students grapple with the idea of quality and walk away with a higher degree of self-sufficiency. B. You're going to ruin this. Don't you? Student translation of non-weighted assignments. If you aren't taking a grade, I'm not going to bother doing this assignment. Or vice versa. If you're just going to replace my quiz grade, why should I do anything with it? And finally, C, as far as grading on work ethic, nothing drives me crazier than one of my gifted kids doing no work at all and acing the assessment. This, however, is my problem and not his. Again, the standard says that Johnny will multiply fractions, not that Johnny will multiply fractions with a good attitude. So agree or disagree, and your reasoning.
Oh, we need to write that
Oh, I
down.
have to do this?
Is there a grade?
No, this is to further your understanding and knowledge towards
Okay,
not
I got
giving the
it.
information.
I think
Great.
this is Zach's grade, actually.
I'm just saying.
I need evidence.
All right. So you want me to do it for you? What's in it for me?
Do it.
She's got free lunch, Dan.
You got free lunch. I should have held off on the lunches. I should have made you work for it.
So extrinsic rewards are.
Yes. You're ruining it. They're very multimedia in there. I'm sorry, guys. They're watching they're watching Rick Wormley. I thought I would save you all
He's the
from
one
watching
that's
Rick
coming,
Wormley.
right?
He's good, but those ones
sold out?
are without his theatrics.
Oh,
He's
that's
just
not
behind a black screen and repeats the same jokes.
Yeah.
Robert, I'm putting my thoughts into
It
words.
sold out. It did book up quickly.
Oh,
Oh, it's good.
Are
Yeah.
you going?
no, I already saw him.
I saw him twice.
Doesn't it?
I'm going.
I haven't seen.
He's good.
He is good.
When is it coming out?
But you know, I'd like to see it in practice. I'd like to see him come to Green Mountain.
Yeah, that's right.
Teach. I won't.
If he really wants to do this, he'd be the one that set up people.
What?
The elder relations. I want yours.
And you know how the student thinks when you get to know them.
Amy, why are you being so antisocial?
I'm a grown with the teacher, man.
Oh,
I want the A.
Jesus.
But see, if you give me the standard space, I'm not gonna get the A now.
Right.
What did you say you need a Parker?
Huh?
And I felt we didn't need to do as much because you just saw the whole spiel for replacing a
Yeah.
quiz grade with a test grade. So, yes, Mr. Key.
Our reasoning is explaining why we agree or disagree,
Yes.
or are we reasoning like the child?
Your mindset, your reasoning.
So
Would you-
really, it's all one and the same with me.
I was gonna say, what's good? And you were
People love me. So if you only put in test grades for our buddy, how do you think that's going?
Oh, should we not say it? Yeah, I mean, it would still be our fault.
Have you heard from
Mm.
me?
No, I think we did. I thought about sending an email saying.
No.
that. Don't even open up the.
No community?
Okay. No response.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We're not done writing.
I know.
You got the English people over here, we're slow and crashing.
Got the source, I think. We got 15 words, it's all pictures to explain.
I feel bad, it's pretty
All right. Ready?
No. Yes.
Robin, these should look familiar to you. Said these should look familiar to you.
Is this what my table did last time? The instructions were not standards.
All right. Looking at, did I take them? Oh, yeah, that's right here.
Look at
Looking at, all right, so looking at A, thumbs up if you agreed with this statement, that we can devote much more time to positive feedback and formative feedback. Right, awesome. I think that, again, the idea behind all these conversations, we know what the right answers are, but it's a matter of moving forward in practice and finding the time to do it and changing our minds. Kate?
I agree with it, but the only part I disagree with is it says like this will help students grapple with the idea of quality and walk with a higher degree of self-sufficiency. I don't know that grading, that doing this practice is gonna make the kids understand quality better. I don't know about that. I just don't know.
I agree with you, Katie.
I think
Why?
what's really behaved in the student that doesn't intend to, not gonna care about the quality.
Okay.
So,
Right.
You may have a kid that doesn't know what quality is, period. I mean, when you're dealing with the repeaters and stuff like that, you've got a kid that doesn't know what success is, so you have to build them up somehow, some way, so they have enough confidence to understand the concept of quality. So how do you get there?
Well, it's like, for instance, with extra credit. You know, extra credit is an inflationary tool, and based on the data from our focus group, a lot of people disagreed with the application of extra credit. Extra credit that didn't further the student's knowledge, an assignment that didn't have them go back and reflect on some of the issues they had on that assessment. They just add 5 extra questions at the end of the test to replace whatever other grade popped up. Or they add extra credit points onto a review session before the test, and so now the kid walks away 5 points higher than the kid who probably was already struggling with the content. The kid who won already understood the material. So it's kind of an interesting idea that rather than focusing on grading behavior, we start grading on the content, the curriculum of the material, rather than inflating it with homework. And a lot of people say, well, homework is not an inflationary grade, it's practice. But look at all those kids who comply and do the homework and yet don't necessarily do as well on the quiz or test next to a kid who hasn't done no homework and aced the assessment. I think we all probably find truth in that, but any other reasonings as to why you agreed with the statement? Dale, why did you say you were going to agree with it?
Well, I think ideally that we all agree that, you know, if we sit in our classes, we do these wonderful lessons, and the kids should walk away with what we have taught them. But if, for instance, I mean, and it's different in different subject areas, but if my kid doesn't come to class prepared to participate in a discussion, to participate in the activity that's based on whether or not they did the reading they were supposed to read, what do you do? And the only way I can hold them accountable is to give them a quiz. Say, okay, your homework was to read chapter 1. Here's your quiz. It's not a hard quiz. And, you know, sometimes it's a take-home quiz. Read and answer these freaking questions so I know you've been through the chapter so that when you come in the next day, we can do this activity.
Do you find that the students who, even with giving a quiz, do students still not read?
Yeah.
So do you think the grade is motivating?
For those who, I mean, for some of them, I mean, I think that's the only reason they do read.
And it gives you a foot to stand on in a parent-teacher conference.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry that they're not doing their reading at home, that's why they're, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is there a way to assess whether they've read or not, right, with this quiz?
Mhm.
And put it in the grade book, but not weight that material?
Well, it's not a make or break grade. It's just an indication of when they score poorly on this test, you know why. Or when they don't do well on this paper and they haven't done any of the front load, you know, material. I mean, I can give you a perfect example. I have a student right now in dual enrollment who was not happy with the grade she made on a paper. She hasn't read any of the chapters and done any of the quizzes. And that, like, front loads the entire idea of the paper itself, you know? And she's ticked off at me because I haven't gone back to explain the chapters. Well, it's dual enrollment. You need to read chapters.
One thing that I thought was interesting was the 4x4 perspective. And Rob and I asked you this question last time, and Katie, we kind of talked about it. If you had to come up with a percentage off the top of your head, and I know it's hard to do, what percentage of students do you find are there because of the content, lack of mastery, and what percentage are there because of behavioral issues that led them to go into a 4x4 classroom?
You include attendance and behavioral?
Mhm.
I've only got about 4 kids who are in my class because they are lack of content knowledge. The rest is behavioral issues.
Yeah, I would say in my class of 21,
Me
there's
too.
3 that is lack of content knowledge, the rest are behavioral.
So-
Whether it be attendance or whatever.
Didn't turn in work.
Right.
Didn't bother to do AP work. I've got those kids in my 4x4.
So for instance, Kelly Eccles and I had called each other and we're on the phone for like an hour and a half one night. And this question popped up. And she said she gives quizzes on her readings too, to
Mhm.
enable the kids to read and come prepared for class discussions, Socratic, whatnot. And I asked her, I said, well, is there a connection between what you're quizzing on the reading, the content, and those questions or similar questions popping up on your test as well? And she said there's a disconnect because the quizzes over here are aimed at getting the kids to read so that they can further their knowledge in that class, talking about higher concepts. The essays somewhere that they have to pull content out of the book in order to prove examples or points?
If they don't
They have
read,
to
then they
read
don't
to
have
do it.
content, you know? I mean, they have to have character motivation. If you don't know why the character did X, Y, and Z, then they're not gonna know why the character did X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yes, Ms. Summer.
I'm going to phrase this carefully. Where I'm listening to everybody say, I need kids to do this reading out of the class. I need these kids to read at home. We looked at data today that we're going to show in our literacy team meeting. How many kids did we say are reading below grade level in the 9th grade only? In the 9th grade? How many?
48%.
I thought it was 52.
Well, I remember our first one was 52, and then
All right.
our second
So
one was
48% of our kids are reading below grade level. So here we are expecting them.
Most of the stuff that we have them read, though, is not at grade level or higher. It's below grade level. The concepts are at grade level and higher. The content, the reading level itself, it's not that high.
So the 11th grade English book, is that an 11th
I would never-
grade Lexiles?
Not all
No,
of
no,
it.
no, no. I would never have them go home and read Patrick Henry's speech.
No.
Never, never. But something, you know, that's easily accessible, yes. I'm not having them, you know, go home, and like, I had Of Mice and Men, very easy to read. simple.
It's easy for you to read.
No, I mean, even for them, the thing that holds them up in, yes, and they love it when they read it.
Yeah.
But when they don't, I mean, it's a very low,
Right.
reading
And
level.
we have a lot of kids who are just, reading is difficult for them, so they're not motivated to read outside of school.
Well, and that's a huge problem, but when you're teaching English, they have to read. And sometimes you can get them to read in the classroom, but what's the cost there?
Sometimes I think that
That's
with
what I'm asking.
Yeah,
That was-
and that's,
that
because we
underlying
have
my
so many
underlying
other things to
question.
teach.
English can be a beat as a content area that obviously is different from social studies or science
But
or
you
math.
still ask them to read outside the classroom, don't you?
I do.
I'm having an issue in complete program. I need you to read this section and be familiar with vocabulary before you can apply these concepts in this program. So
We
if I'm
read
giving you
it.
journal questions to answer based on what you read and you're refusing to do that.
So let me ask you this, to stay on topic with formative versus summative, not trying to motivate students with grades, because I think that sometimes is an entirely different conversation, but just this one grading practice, how do you foresee an English class implementing this process of going through and replacing a formative grade with a summative grade?
I can do that in writing.
Okay, how?
I have no problem doing that in writing. As a matter of fact, I did it because I had a girl come to me and say, yeah, I didn't have my, my first rough draft, but here is, a full paper. It's not a brainstorm, but I have a 0 for the brainstorm first draft because I didn't have it then. But in order to do this paper, I had to do it at some point. So can I get some points in there? And I went, you know what? Yeah, you can. Because you've gotten to this point, so you had to have done this at some point, maybe not officially the way I wanted you to.
Because we
Wouldn't
had
that
that
work for a
conversation.
book though too, if you were doing like chapter 1 through 3, chapter 4 through 6, whatever, and then they did, let's say they didn't read it when they were supposed to, but then, like some people maybe did when they were in high school, they stayed up all night and read the entire book the day before the test.
But the problem with that is, I don't do quiz, and never talk about it. We use that quiz as then a springboard to talk about the chapters and then talk about the deeper concepts. I just want to know that they read it, and then I'm not testing deeper knowledge. I'm just testing, do you know the plot points?
On the quiz you're talking about.
Right. But when I
Right.
get to the test, then we talk about the big stuff.
Right, and their argument is gonna be, well, the standard is that they get the big points, and if they do, then.
That's fine, but I'm not changing, you weren't able to contribute to discussion, you were learning the stuff that everybody else read.
Mr. Keough?
Yes.
I think with us and teaching books, it's a completely different animal.
I can't
It
hear
is.
you, Kevin.
With us teaching books, it's a completely different animal because we rely on the discussion and they have to be able to talk about the book. So anybody can sit there and listen during the class discussion and then throw the answers back down on the test. But at some point, then it's just, let's just do away with the reading and then A, B, C, and D, here's your test tomorrow, there we go. That's what it
Yeah,
seems
we'll
like
just
we
talk
do.
about the book, we don't have to read it.
This is this character, this is that character, this is the theme, this is that conflict, this is that conflict, this is this.
But they can't
Here's the test.
contribute, it's
That's-
all me just lecturing, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing.
Are your reading quizzes weighted differently than your content quizzes?
Of course,
Okay.
they're teeny.
What percentage would you say?
Um,
Are you total point?
yeah, I'm total points, so I might make them 20 to 25 points where a test is 100 points, so it's like, it's small.
And what, do you have vocab quizzes embedded too in your units, or how does that work?
Yeah, but they're, other vocab, it's separate from,
Do you think
I
that
mean, I have both.
you could, and your vocab then pops up again on the test too, so that might be another
No.
strategy? It does not?
No,
Why
that's
not?
separate, because only the vocab that's in the book. I do separate vocab for SAT stuff.
Okay. So vocab material that's in the book, you're
Mhm.
quizzing them on?
Not usually. We talk about the words and
Right.
we use them in writing,
How
but
do-
not
So
necessarily.
you're assessing it in their writing then?
Yes.
So, but there's no assessment on that vocabulary? that
Right.
you- Okay.
How much reading are they actually doing inside your classroom?
It depends on the grade level. Like with Beowulf, I do all of it in there. With dual enrollment, they do it all outside, because it's college, so that doesn't really count.
In 10 inclusion, we read everything in class.
Mm-hmm.
And in 9 as well, everything, because if you don't read it in class, it won't get read.
Yeah.
Whether or not their reading level,
Right.
regardless of reading level, they will not read it.
All right, literacy
But
coach
one
had
of-
a statement
I was-
too after Ms. Humphrey.
One of the statements the superintendent made to us at at our conference in the summer that he also stated in the video that we watched of him is how much authentic reading, actual reading and writing are they doing every day inside individual classrooms? I don't have an answer for that. I'm just saying that is the question he has posed to us. They should be doing actual reading and authentic reading and writing in every single classroom, every single day.
I think that, I know, at least for me, I start with reading in the classroom at the beginning of the year and move to sending it home later when I do things that,
You
books.
scaffold it.
Yeah,
You
I
build
mean,
it.
and I let them read in class. I mean, with my 4x4 kids though, I found a book that they liked. They read, and they read it outside of class, and they read it inside of class too on Fridays. But I have that luxury of seeing them every single day, so I can keep them going every single day with it, a little bit at a time.
I have a question. Sorry, Shana, here's your turn, sorry. I was just gonna suggest that maybe if the reading part would be more of a homework type grade than a quiz, because it's not really a skill, it's a did you do it or not.
But I think the only way to assess did they do it or not is with a simple,
Right, but you could code it as a homework, and then
it's total points, so it really
It
doesn't
doesn't
matter
matter what you call it.
in my grade.
However, for some of our English teachers who are using percentage,
Yeah, you could code it that way.
code it as it's a homework, because it's not necessarily a skill, it's did you do it or did you not do your homework? And then that's the behavior. And then, that's,
and
I
then it
know
gets,
it's
because
another
then it
beast,
starts
but at
going
least.
to another category, yeah, and that is, should we be
At
weighting
least
our
you're not,
behaviors?
at least it's not slanting the grade
Right.
as far as the skill. 'Cause if you get
Or-
a 0 on that reading quiz, then it looks like the reading potential is low, and it might not be.
Right,
Instead of, you didn't do your homework, and so now it's coded as a homework grade.
right, as opposed
So
to an
now we know
assessment.
that the problem is you're not completing the reading, not that you can't read.
Because you're assessing the content of the book as opposed to the ability to process and
Right,
read the
right.
information. All right, for our other subject. English
I
is,
want
oh,
to say that
yes.
if I would take an average class of mine as 28 students
Uh-huh.
in the 9th grade, when I poll them at the beginning of the year, how many of them enjoy reading? How many of them read independently? Except for 3 or 4 students, they all laughed. Their parents don't read at home, they don't get the newspaper, they don't do magazines.
Right.
In fact, they don't even listen to the news. So when you bring up current events to them, they're just completely lost. And you have to tell them, authentic, if I can get them to follow along in the book while we read it, and Mark and I can call on them to answer literal questions. Once we're sure that they're on the same page with us, then we can do some more higher order skills. But if you're not a reader, and they'll tell you, I'm not a reader. It's hard to instill the pleasure that you can get from reading.
So Barb, how would you see in your classroom implementing this strategy, replacing a quiz grade with a test grade right now? What type of grades would you replace?
Well, I have done that.
Yeah.
And what I'm afraid of,
Uh-huh.
truthfully, is that you get a paper back with a quiz grade of, say, 80%, and then I give you, when we're finished, a test grade back, and you've got 90%. If you go back in the grade book and you look at it, and I can just hear them saying, I didn't make an 80%, or I didn't make a 90% on that grade, I only made an 80. They think that I've made a mistake, because I'm afraid they remember what their grades are.
Let me
or
ask,
they
what
kept
percentage
them.
of students do you think really keep track of?
Well, I
on it?
tell them to
Right.
keep the paper, that I
Right.
give them back with a
Well,
grade
you
on
can
it.
just tell
And
them
you can
that
explain what you've done.
you were rewarding them for.
And I wouldn't even phrase it as rewarding. I would say, this is
You-
your improvement.
Yes, you improved, and so I adjusted it in the grade book.
You know,
Okay.
because if you keep the paper, and you come up to me, and there are some honest kids that will come up and say, my grade wasn't a 90, my grade was only, say, a 50.
Oh, I've never had that.
Well, I've had
I
kids
had it the
come
other
up-
way, not that way.
Right, if it hurt them, they can be.
Now, I've had them be that honest that they will come up and say, that really wasn't my grade.
Well,
Now, I did have a student
Yep.
do the same thing she's insinuating would happen. And basically what they said to me is, how come this says replace with test grade? And I said, because you actually got like a 20 there, but your test grade is.
but then it comes down to that communication piece, and that is, and I know Coach McGowan had offered up the argument, well, what motivation is there then to do well on the quizzes? Well, again, I think it's this idea that, just like he has practice, there's penalty on the test, on the game day. What does he do if players didn't show up to practice? They don't play. So, if they've not performed well on the quizzes, and then this assessment rolls around, it's not saying that we're going to reward you for trying that much harder on the test. First of all, I don't know why we would punish a kid for trying harder on the test than on the quizzes. I'm a little confused in that regard. But as we've seen from Katie's grade book and Wendy's, it's not an inflationary practice. And, Wendy's not even telling her kids. She doesn't even think that her kids would know what's happening. Did you tell yours?
I tried telling my 4x4 and they didn't get it.
I told my kids,
They really didn't. I was like, guys, if you do better on your vocab quiz, I'm going to change, or your vocab test, I'll change all your vocab quizzes. They were like, wait, what? And I was like, if you do this, wait, what? And I was like, whatever.
Yeah, I'll see if
Don't worry
any of them
about it.
noticed when when they get their.
I
They
had
won't.
full
They-
disclosure with my kids at the beginning of the year and their parents when they came for open house, that I will replace your quiz grades on the where you perform better on the test. And not once have I had a kid just purposely bomb or prepare for a quiz. Most of the time, the kid walks away with like at least an 80%.
Most of them are within the same range.
Right.
I mean,
It's not like it's a 20% marginal difference.
there's a couple of kids that are just standouts of that, they're just the kid that doesn't do anything in class and they already know it. And then if that's what I'm measuring, then fine, give them the whatever grade.
One, and we wanted to call on Chris, I think Ryan forgot to, but Chris had a student in AP right now with a 17%. Because they had, bombed a few of the reading quizzes and everything else. But after the unit test, which for AP is massive, 3 essays, 70% or 70 multiple choice questions, much bigger than the quiz, this girl knocked out of the park and got a 97, as opposed to the 16 on the reading quizzes because she hadn't prepared, come to class prepared. Well, are we going to weigh her grade down because she hadn't read the content of U.S. history the night before for his 5-question quiz? Or are we going to truly reflect her grade because of the 3 essays that she had to write, which were more rigorous than circling a letter, and the 70 multiple choice questions, which were much more rigorous than the simple reading questions he asked? And so he bumped it and changed it, and he said he's not going back. And most
So,
of
Mayor,
the
I think
kids...
the point of that, though, is to make sure that the test is an accurate.
Correct.
That comes
And
down
it's
to-
also making sure that the quiz somehow aligns with the test, because I'll give you another example. Somebody in social studies says, well, I get vocab quizzes all the time. And I said, well, would you be okay with replacing those vocab quizzes with your final unit test? And she said, no. So why not? Because I don't put the vocab on the test. And I thought, the vocab nowhere appears on your test for social studies. Social studies is driven by content for words, like science is. I mean, if you don't know that content word, you're not going to be able to make the connection. And she dug her feet in and refused to do it because she felt that, they should be holding kids responsible for vocabulary. Well, if it's good over here on the quiz, why can't it be good over here on the test? And that's the argument I think we have to ask. To save us some time, because I think we understand the purpose of it, and I think most of us are on board in some way to start implementing this practice, whether it's writing, whether it's quizzes and tests, whether it's vocab and assessment. What I've done is on the back of the reading, that you can certainly read over for your leisure, on the back is a sample way to track how these grades take place. And that's how we got data from Stephanie and from Wendy and from Katie. And this is just a suggestion. You can come up with an entirely different one, depending on how you want to track it. But it's a matter of maybe looking at the grade before you implement this practice and the grade after you do it to see what type of change it makes to your student grade, mark if it's an improvement, and then what percentage point. And then in the end, you can average them all together to see substantially, on average, what percentage point did I see this increased measure in my
Well,
class.
do you do it for every student, or you just pick a sample?
I
at
would
random?
this year, Barb, I would pick a sample. I would pick one class. and
Just
see-
one class and keep a log for each student in that class?
Because we're not wanting to create more work for you this year. But again, it's test driving it out in a class to see what effect this has on your student grade, and if this is a practice that you can live by. And can you defend the practice if someone
I
asks
have
you?
a question.
Yeah.
I have a question too.
Oh,
Sure.
go ahead. Philippa, go ahead. I've already.
You know the wording of this, where you say extra credit, which often has nothing to do with course objectives. Do you want us to stop giving it? Just the implication is you'd
Well-
like us to stop giving it?
Sure. Well, extra credit is not in the formative and summative. I mean, extra credit for some teachers, depending on how they use it. Some teachers, like I said before, tack on 5 multiple choice questions at the end of the test, and bam, oh my God, the kid's score raised. We just gave them an extra set of questions. You know, some teachers go an extra mile, and the extra credit assignment is much more rigorous and demands much more out of the kid to prove that they know the material better than those other kids on the test. So I think it takes the shape or the form of the extra credit. The other question, I think, is it open to every student? Because if it's limited to a small group of students who have the opportunity, then we're running into an issue of it being unfair. But most people in the interest group were, again, surprisingly, I think we had...
Extra credit for federal cards, extra credit for.
Right, behaviors,
that's dumb.
extra credit for behaviors
I mean-
of compliance. You know, great job, you turned in all your homework grades, plus, you know, you get an additional 10 points, or free homework. You know, I don't know what type of incentive that sends to a student
I know.
when they're just in compliance with turning in a federal card or turning back expectations. I guarantee you open up a grade book today in the school, and representative of 115 faculty members, how many teachers are going to have a classroom expectation sheet and that, as that first grade or that second grade?
We
And
were
it-
told we weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
Well, but
And
again.
it's still there in several.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's just a matter of, did that measure the content in your course? So, no, it's not them telling you. And this isn't the administrators telling you what to do and what not to do. This is for us to think about, for us to try and practice and see if it's something that we agree with, or maybe you take it back and you modify it somehow. For instance, rather than doing it for all your quizzes, you're doing it for your writing samples. Could be that one social studies just does it for her vocab quizzes. Last but not least, one other sheet I provided you. This was information from an individual who changed her gradebook practices. Katie, thank you. And Wendy's got some great information
Here,
too.
if you want to look at it.
But I made a copy for everybody just in case, and Wendy's got hers there too. For 2B, 23 out of the 24 students benefited, and it shows you, and if you're in doubt, that it's really not an inflationary practice. I mean, here we have a kid from a 75 to a 77, a 73 to a 74, a 90 to a 91. And sometimes that's a make or break between an A and a B, or an A minus and a regular A. Some kids thrive on that. Not every kid, but
From 63 to a 67.
that's a significant.
Well,
impact.
it's these AP kids who they want to see, I know like Kaya, she's sitting at 89 for calculus, it's killing
Right.
her.
Are your core level students that freaked out about where they
No.
are? They're just happy that they have a D.
And,
Some of
and
them.
the kids whose grades went up, like I said before, it was kids who missed a quiz and never made it
Right,
out.
right.
And so when you replace a 0, of course it's
Of
gonna
course
jump
it
up.
does, yeah.
And in the class where 12 out of, in the 2A, only 12 out of 24 students benefited. However, Christina and I are fairly certain that 10 of those 12 students are possibly stoned.
They're probably in my class.
So, I think if they're, when they're sitting there with the Cheetos fingers with the munchies all the time, I don't
Some people
know.
prefer to be high.
As a quick last thing to ask of you, and I know we've asked a lot of you already today for attending and participating. And if you're ready to take that next step, okay, which this is why we've asked you to come here today, is to actually do some of this action research in your classroom, replacing the formative with the summative assessment. And all we ask you to do, you don't have to do it right now, but at some point, if you could please return this to me, why, or what strategy it is, replacing formative with summative, why you're committing to this practice, don't just put for a PLP point, and then what are you expecting might happen when you implement the practice. So what are your expectations for the strategy, and last but not least, how are you going to track the impact this practice has on your students? I've given you a suggestion to use. You can come up with your own tracking device, but eventually we will want to look, not to, no, you're fine, Bill, but go ahead. We don't want to be, super involved in your grade book, but we would like to know what type of impact this has had on your students. If you have any objections, gladly be open, but again, take your time. You don't even have to do it today. Like I said, you can sit on it, think about it. Just make sure you get it back to me, hopefully within the week. Yes?